So, hey, I'm here with Dr. Joan Palmiter Bajorek. Am I pronouncing your name right, or is it Bajorek or some other pronunciation?
Yeah, in English it's Bajorek, but you are
Bajorek.
right to question all the. I usually joke that it's like palm budge, like
Uh-huh.
and it's a very long name. But yeah, it's originally from Bohemia, from the Czech Republic.
You serious?
No, many generations ago, many,
Okay. Oh,
many.
cool, cool. I lived in Prague, so in
Oh,
Bohemia, and
lovely.
now I'm in Brno in Moravia. But yeah, cool. Have you ever visited?
I have. Yeah, I
Yeah.
actually, it's so strange. I walked around in a blue scarf and a black coat, and like I looked like everybody, or like people kept asking me for directions. And I was like, oh, yeah, my people are from here. Like I really blend in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's great. That's great. So please, John, you know, I think you're very well known in the industry because of various things like Women in Voice, and you're now with OneReach AI. But maybe could you give a bit of an introduction to yourself and say where you've come from and what you've been up to and what you're doing now, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, greetings from Seattle. My name is Joan. I am, right, I'm the VP of Product Research at OneReach AI. My previous background is in linguistics and academia. So I'm originally a linguist. Um, it's really early in my career as a linguist, NLP and acoustics, and was like, this is the future, like all in. Like at the time, it was hard. People were like, don't touch that, bad
Yeah.
idea, difficult, but the research out of Stanford. So that was circa 2015. And
Mhm.
from there, got my PhD in this field, speech language technology, and really seeing the future of multimodal interfaces. From there, worked at Nuance as a senior conversation designer, whatever titles they use these days at Nuance, and then worked at a digital agency, Versa, after that, and then several startups in my technical career on product, data, all the different things as our field evolves. And as you mentioned, most people know me best for Women in Voice, which I bootstrapped starting in 2018 when I was like,
Mhm.
where are the women?
Yeah,
Where are
yeah,
the people of color? Like this field has such opportunity. And especially with my research in bias and kind of how systems perform, like when we talk about optimal systems. And I was like, wait a minute, these problems are interrelated. Oh, there's no women in the building. I wish that were a joke, but it's real.
yeah,
And so
yeah, yeah.
building Women in Voice to the size and scale it is today, with over 20 chapters across the world, in 4 years, and then my technical career in data and product, and kind of translating that to storytelling. I would
Mhm.
argue, like, to be able to speak to larger audiences, and all the public speaking that I do on different stages, as a public speaker, and as influencer. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's a pretty good nutshell. You've done a lot, and it's a lot of great stuff. Like really, fantastic work with Women in Voice, and various stages of your career. And so now you're at OneReach, and I recently read Age of Invisible Machines, which of course was written by Robb Wilson, the CEO of
That's right.
OneReach, right? Yeah, and
Yes.
really incredible stuff. It's what OneReach are working on. It feels very now. It's like at this stage in conversational AI where people see the potential, and without getting too much into the nitty gritty, various applications of it so far have not worked so well, or people perhaps weren't bold enough. But OneReach have got a very strong vision for where this can go, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Age of Invisible Machines, which my CEO wrote, I mean, he and the co-founder have been bootstrapping this company for over a decade. And we just raised private equity last year. Like, you have to realize the long-term vision that's got us here, of when we want to build these complex systems, how do we build them?
Yeah.
Right? This is not, it's not a simple thing to do. And so the ability to be really flexible, really thoughtful, these complex systems, that all the if else's, that are built in a no code environment, and just how fast, like hyper automation. I love how people are like, what is even automation? And then we're hyper automation above that. Like, we really, I think one of my favorite parts of the book is how concrete. There's really abstract concepts that are talked about, and then they're like, okay, if you really wanted to implement this, here's what blockchain would look like. sending your neighbor a thank you, like very, very simple experiences. So I've been very much enjoying the book, and we've gotten extremely positive feedback.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And I think some of the things you're touching on are definitely related to what I want to ask you about. So
Sure.
Yeah, before we go into that, I just love to throw out a few questions at the start, really just to get the ball rolling. So to get your personal perspective on 3 things, and I call it 30 seconds go, but of course, 30 seconds is great. If it's longer, whatever. So can I give you the first, please?
Let's go.
Cool. Please, Joan, what's the most useful thing you use at work?
Communication.
Okay. One word answer. I love it. Perfect. Yeah, communication. I think that sums it up. I love it so much that I'm satisfied. Question number 2. How should a researcher approach their work?
If you say, I'm very curious about this topic, I'd like to measure this and this, whoa, the world can really expand for you, and you'll see different things you weren't even prepared. Well, I guess you're prepared in the sense that you're curious, but there will always be things that should jump out to you and surprise a researcher. If they're doing it incorrectly, it's, potentially too predictable, or you're trying to create what you already validate your own assumptions.
Yeah, I get you. Please, number 3. What does the term data mean to you?
Data. Data is something measurable in a nutshell.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I work with mostly quantitative data, so this is more difficult for qualitative data, but in my world, it's mostly quantitative.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, cool. I think you totally you knocked those out of the park. That's boom, boom, boom. Great answers.
Thank you.
So let's go into the proper interview, the full interview. So what I would really love to speak to you about is, having read Age of Invisible Machines and these concepts of like hyper personalization, hyper automation. We're looking at a situation where everything's hyper, it's speeding up, where it's much faster processes of creating things. And I think obviously user research is, as with all conversational projects, it has to be a big part of what of our work, because we have to understand user needs and so on. So I really want to get into this with you, because I think you're, as I said when I reached out to you, you're really one of the very few people in the world who can speak to this and give great insights. So I'm super excited to have you here. So when we're talking about, generative AI, which I guess even that concept for most people is still quite new. So we're talking about large language models and ChatGPT, and perhaps also the visual side, like, the image creation tools and so on, like DALL-E and things. So how would these emerging technologies like generative AI and conversational AI affect the work of experienced designers?
Ooh, what a great question. Okay, well, I think I agree with you. I want to make sure that we understand, because the generative AI is just being thrown around, and I really want to make sure people understand it as we translate it to the user experience. So what we used to have, and we still have, is natural language processing. We're literally categorizing words.
Yeah.
And almost all of us know about this a bit with predictive texting. You put a few words in and it says, I think I'm going to finish your sentence. Is this what you're planning to say? You've got this noun phrase, verb phrase, whatever. That's natural language generation. We think we're going to generate what you might do next. Mm-hmm. Now, what we just seen recently is ChatGPT, where you put in, write me an essay about Eleanor Roosevelt that's 6 pages long. Whoop, there we go. It appears, the latency may not be ideal, but we've got this. And you mentioned DALL-E, which we ask, I'd like a painting, of myself on a horse. Poof, there's a painting of you on a horse. And so when we have these image generation, text generation, super sophisticated, like generating things out of thin air, like this type of generative AI can be audio, we predicted and talked about. We've been predicting and talking about this for so long with these large language models, and what you can do with just the sheer scale of these data sets is difficult for us to conceptualize. I really think that's the case. And so when you think about the user experience and you go, wait a minute, okay, futuristic, we can play with these games. How does this actually translate into systems we might use every day? And I think that translation, a lot of people are still struggling with, because, I can make angel images. What am I going to do with them for real? Where is this actually going? And so at OneReach, we have been using GPT actually for years internally. And it's really exciting to see predictive information when I could tell you all of the different things we do with GPT already internally, but I think what you're talking about also is, how is this iterating the user experience? How does that translate from huge futuristic towards day-to-day? What are we doing? And although I love generative AI, I think one of the things we're most brilliant at is the speed of iterating the user experience. To look at the data, like, this is one of my favorite things, Ben, is like, I look at the data, my team and I make visualizations, and we go, whoa, we had this assumption. Here's what the data is showing us in real time. Is aggregate huge. The data set continues to grow. Here's how we can optimize it. Like, here's where we can move the needle for all these users. Like, like millions of pings a day on these systems. And if we can move the needle 10% for all these users to have a better experience, it's phenomenal. They love our systems, CSAT scores, everything. Like, but the amount of money, I guess I was like, this system is performing well on several different metrics. And so that user experience, just a little bit better, actually, in my mind, is the huge differentiator. That translating these fabulous systems into a system that's robust, that's enterprise grade. And I think that's where OneReach really shines, is our experience in UX that comes to these really cutting edge systems.
Yeah, well, it's super relevant, isn't it? Because, there's so much excitement around, for example, ChatGPT right now.
Yeah.
And everyone's in this sort of wow stage where they're like, sorry, cat's going, in this wow stage where they're like, this is amazing. Exactly as you said, like, I can generate angel pictures, but what do I do with them? And I think when there's all of this excitement where, exactly as you say, we need to consider how this can actually improve the experience. And what I think could be the real danger for people working in teams who embrace this technology is that suddenly everything feels out of their hands, because everything's being generated all over the place. There's so much stuff being created, and they can't really have an overview on basic, like, quality control, as well as being aware of, how it's meeting user needs.
Because that's one of the most dangerous things about these systems with large language models that, Black female researchers have been talking about for years, like, warning, warning, like, when this spews out racist awfulness, when it spews out the wrong answer, right? Like, just because these are powerful and will generate responses, what does that actually mean? Like, I honestly sleep better at night knowing that Microsoft is investing in OpenAI because they have moderation. Like, how seriously and rigorously they, like, just looking at LinkedIn, for example, if they see issues, they will curtail them. They have a team, like, unlike Twitter, our friends at Twitter, but just like, there is robust taking care, like, there's an adult in the room, if you think about it that way. And I really appreciate that, because these can go off the rails. It is very, very powerful what these systems can do. And so I think it's literally the webinar we designed that's happening, I think, probably after this comes out, or I'm not sure, but it's called Taming Generative AI, because we really think about this as a wild entity, like, in the most true sense of that phrase.
Yeah, I totally get you. It's like, it's extremely powerful in that it will absolutely dazzle you, and then at the same time I'm talking about ChatGPT, for example, and then suddenly it will come out with a response where you're like, wow, you don't get the basic fundamentals. I've seen people give it maths challenges where it can't calculate how people's ages will go in parallel over time, and it's approaching it like some far more complex problem.
Right. Well, and it's because it doesn't have the same, just because it can generate text, it could be spilling out gobbledygook.
Yeah.
But because many of the responses look so human-like it's being banned in schools here in the United States. I don't know if you've heard about this, but teachers are freaking out, like, wait a minute, you could spew out a 6-page essay, like, uh-oh, warning, warning. Whereas I think it's a tool, but because you might not know who is creating it. Like, I'm really jazzed and excited to see people publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, written by Dr. Mitchell with GPT.
Yeah.
Like being cited as an author, which, sparking a lot of debate in other senses. But I would recommend that you do cite that you're using these systems. Or I don't know how you think about them, but we're really pushing the bounds of ethics in a lot of these discussions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I feel like this is a whole lovely sidetrack we could go.
Keep going, Ben.
Yeah,
go. Stick to the questions. I'm down.
I've only got you for so long. So what I would like to ask you, here's a very basic question, which I think there could be so much to say about. From my experience in user research, you can create a generalized user persona. Like this is, generally speaking, who we think we're targeting. However, if we're talking about hyper-personalization, which I think with the technology now, this is something that's available to us and we really should aim for, where we can basically create different bots for different folks, so that each of their unique needs are being met. That's a wonderful affordance of the technology. So how do we approach that? Is there a way that you do where you can have an overview of the various different bots that are speaking to each user individually?
Yes. I mean, there are at least 3 examples I could give you that are currently in production.
Amazing.
But I think what I also, having conceptualized the field versus actually being at OneReach, what I used to think is that we literally had a ginormous dashboard and we're watching all the different users. We're just like, oh, here are these personas.
Yeah.
Whereas what is actually currently being deployed on a very, very simplistic level is proactive. And honestly, we shock our users by doing this. You call into a system, we already have a lot of your data on file. We validate, hey, Ben, are you calling in about, checking in about, I don't know, your food delivery, whatever the case may be. These proactive, we only know your phone number, but we can match it on file. And suddenly the user's like, whoa, this is so personalized. Like, I have this experience that knows me, right? That's very, very simplistic systems. We're actually making digital twins as well, so that we, for example, an HR example, that you then continues to ask about his PTO, constantly scheduling his vacations. Okay, we build this out and continue. Okay, last year you asked about this PTO, this year you asked about this. The user experiences this, digital twin of theirs that is iterative over time. So there's a third example I was thinking of as you're speaking, but I think this personalization may not be as difficult as we think it is. I know in the book Age of Invisible Machines, Robb goes full force about how personalized it could be, and Kathy Pearl has been speaking about these for years. But really, I think there's an incremental personalization that is beyond the system knows me as soon as I speak, which I believe exists as well. In many capacities, but you know what I mean? I think there's something between all and nothing in these personalizations.
That seems like a really sound approach to because as you were speaking, I was thinking, well, it makes sense that we can still have a consistent bot persona where it is essentially the same bot that's speaking to everybody. It's just it knows each user as an individual user.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and this is, my joke is minimum viable product, the smallest little step forward, concrete, practical, because in a few years, what these systems will be able to do, and will be normalized to expect that of these systems.
Yeah.
Like the expectations of our customers, we're like, okay, all right, you're like, especially with the book, we're on a different page to be able to build these things for them. So it's a really exciting moment.
No, absolutely. Even, you know, as you're describing this, that people will call in and the bot knows, appears to know them quite well. The first time, it probably feels like some kind of magic, and then they
It
expect
does.
it.
Oh, absolutely. And they're like, why isn't this by default?
Yeah.
Why do I have to call a different system or, ask a different system? And they don't do that for me. Wait a minute. Like, this is old, very, very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool stuff. So another aspect of this would be, we're talking about having data about the user, which is perhaps like their PI, like their personal identity. I can't actually remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically their ID. PI is ID. But of course, each person, even as I'm talking now, I'm expressing my idiolect and my own unique way of talking and getting lost and tongue-tied. And we each have our own unique modes of expression and personalities. Can we adapt bots to speak to that, to speak to each, even perhaps each individual's pace of talking, or these aspects? How much can we personalize that?
Specifically mimicking prosody, dialect. Is that what you're speaking to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know there's been, Amazon and Google systems might whisper back to you. Have you seen this feature where it can tell like how much output you're, I haven't actually seen a lot of systems who start mimicking back to you your own dialect, your own pace of speech. I think these would be very interesting to build. I did see a research study, though, about people caring quite a bit about what accent was speaking back to them. I don't know if you've seen some early research about these robots that like, oh, it speaks my accent back to me. Oh, it speaks British English back to me. Oh, it speaks Australian English back to me, and how well they perceived the system to do at the survey at the end.
Okay.
And like people strongly preferring it matching their dialect. Even if it's exact same flows, we're sending them down. Again, back to that personalization. Wow, that matches me. The system like sees me in a way. So yeah, I haven't seen those in deployment, but they can be built for sure.
Yeah, totally. I feel like it's a whole area that could be explored. Whether there's a great deal of value in it, I don't know. Perhaps from an accessibility standpoint, it could be very useful. But yeah, it's interesting. So when we're speaking about hyper-personalized designs and user research, and you were describing in your work literally having a screen where you can monitor the data, which I would so much love to see, where you can see how people are progressing within their interactions with your bots. What's the best approach to act on these insights and data?
Oh gracious. What a question. What is the best approach? I think knowing your own data, it would be, I guess, an increment I wish I had a very sophisticated answer for you, but usually when I'm working with today's repertoire, collecting the data, I've worked certainly on other projects, not here at OneReach, where I'm like, we didn't even collect that? Like, oh no, like let's start tomorrow by even collecting that data point. Looking at it on different timescales. I think one of my favorite recent projects is I talked to a customer about, I'm pretty sure we can optimize this better. I've seen your system, I've seen the data, output. I think we can do better than this. Let's look like, how do you measure your own data? They use SQL to query theirs. And here's the different, they literally gave me the TXT export of what their teams are analyzing. Okay. And so I can understand bird's eye view to really narrowing down from the entire system, as you mentioned, this like dashboard of performance on like maybe a few numbers. And then like, okay, we had an error. What happened there? We narrow down to the like very specific example. And you're right, with PII, we got to be very gentle. We don't exactly care about, Rachel's experience, but we do want to know, where did we make that mistake? Is that mistake replicated through the system? Is that a broader problem, or was that N of one? was that really just, broke down with Rachel, here's why, we move on. And so I think that honestly goes back to your earlier question about researchers and leading with curiosity. What are we measuring? What is the research question? And as you also mentioned, like, just because we can build a system, does it really move the needle? Does that really transform the user experience? And if it does, and there's ROI, we should implement that. Let's make it happen. But I think on an aggregate level, I love just seeing things in timescales as we can make them bigger and better. And that kind of, my team talks about the bird's eye view versus the very, very nitty gritty on the ground, individual data point. I think that's quite magical, frankly.
No, totally. It's like micro and macro, or telescope and microscope. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it is quite magical. It's,
as a researcher, I mean, that's what we dream of, like these ginormous data sets we can process.
Yeah. Totally. And so, as my understanding, and I'm basing this all on my assumptions from my research, from reading the book and so on, that you're working to a faster beat. It's more agile than agile. It's rapid development. So you've got these analytics coming in where you have a kind of general understanding of how the conversations are going, and then probably some little red flags coming up, because we always have them in conversational AI, right? Where it's like, okay, here's where they're getting stuck.
Mm-hmm.
How quickly would you want to act on that? Like, how many questions would you, I feel like this is too general, but I'll continue. How many questions are you asking when that comes in? Because of course, you want to be quick, right? You want to be more agile than agile, but then of course you don't want to just be accentuating a problem by rapidly working on it without fully understanding it. Where's that happy medium? Like, what would you recommend for that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it really, right now, what I'm seeing is on different projects, there's completely different protocols about how sensitive and how fast some companies want to move. We have one client that's like, I like where we're in a stable place. Like, we see a problem. Let's talk about that in the next meeting. Like, there's a trust that the system is stable enough. There's another client we have who's so nervous and reactive. And I as soon as we see a problem, we like, what's the fastest, we can fix that problem. So I think, and frankly, I really prefer the first approach that the system is stable, that we absolutely can optimize. In theory, there should always be opportunity to optimize. But I think we build in, like, trying to figure out what I'm allowed to say publicly. We build in systems that check. Rob talks about this in the book, that ideally the system is constantly checking itself. It's like my home security system. It sends pings through the entire IoT system to make sure, even when I'm not worried about it, that it's working. And it'll send me like, this IoT, there's a glitch with this one. Please check the camera. Like all these different things in our systems too. We have checks and balances to make sure that they're performing well. But they're ginormous, robust systems. I mean, like how complicated they are. Keeping them all maintained is no joke of a project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the bizarre thing that we're working with, where we have almost maximum complexity on the back end, and for the user, it should feel natural and fluid, and just like our conversation now, just here's what I'm thinking, let's talk about it, and make it actual, make something happen.
Yeah, and that's when I worked at Nuance, I couldn't believe the backends. I was just like, this is really the back end of an enterprise, like complex, hairy if else's, and like all these different people working at different parts. It's like a ginormous steam engine or something. Like each part of everyone's working on different parts of the system, and to know, right, that as you mentioned, the user experience is quite small, quite sleek in theory. Like what you see, like what the UI actually is, what the user experience, and like the cacophony of the back end. So, and then I would argue that's one of the reasons you need a OneReach AI type platform, is to actually build these and maintain them.
Yeah.
That's an enterprise grade, whatever it is, that's HIPAA compliant, etc. So yeah, no joke on the tooling.
No, totally, totally. Exactly as you say. Yeah, to monitor it and yeah, keep on top of everything that's happening, and as it's iterating, it's a hard task. Um, it's actually not in the questions, but I feel that you're able to just bat these away, so I'm going to throw one at you. Just related to teams, because you were speaking about it, that you were comparing these two teams where one takes their time, analyzes the data, and decides how they're going to move, and the other one is much more like reactive and like, well, we need to deal with that. So where do you see user research fitting within teams in hyper automation? Like, is have you got any recommendations for best practice from what you've seen in companies beyond don't be too sensitive and don't, it's good to take your time and really consider and rationalize your next move?
Gracious. Best UX, best recommendations. I feel like you got to talk to Rebecca Evans for that one. In my experience, I honestly think it would lead back to that curiosity question of, we think we know the persona. We think we know a lot about what's going to happen in these systems. Documenting what we think is going to be happening, checking it against the real data. We think a lot of users are using this. Actually, they prefer this. This is what we're actually seeing in the system. We may want to build out these flows. I think user experience and user research is iterative. Like you have to keep it in mind. And I would joke as a researcher, it keeps me gainfully employed. But really, when we can move the needle, when the user experience and the ROI are directly connected, companies are really eager to support users in a completely different way. I think that's one of the things I've actually been across many projects that I've done of this, scale. People pay for, okay, optimize it. I want this, dollar sign. When it's actually deployed, they go, wait a minute, the user experience, like, oof, I really want this tweaked. I want that. Like, how fast those come in succession again and again and again is wild to me. And so I think I would recommend in a best practice world is that the build team is ready for that. Yeah. They themselves are not reactive to, oh, shoot, should we measure like CSAT scores and, like NPS? Like, let's really have that by default ready for our client so that they're thrilled when I come in and say, hey, I love the numbers we're seeing. I think we can do better performing against these other numbers that I see. Here's where I think we could. Are you comfortable with having that conversation about how we can all do better? Usually is well received. Yes.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I feel this is as long as I asked to keep you for this interview. So John, it's been totally brilliant. Like I love what you're doing, and these insights are utterly fantastic. I feel like this is going to be very useful for people because I'm sure I'm not the only person asking how are our methods going to change as we embrace hyper automation. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, cool. Have a great day.
You as well. Cheers.
Cheers.